Welcome to the a16z podcast. I'm Michael Copeland. Right about now, you're pondering what to eat, or maybe pondering why you ate so much. And so in that spirit, we thought it was a good time to talk about the future of food. To help us do that on the podcast, we brought in Rhinehart, who is the CEO and founder of Soylent, which is an engineered food. It's complete nutrition for people, and it comes in a powder and a bottle. And also on the podcast, we have Chris Dixon, who led the firm's investment in Soylent. So we get Rob and Chris to talk about food and what the future of food systems might look like. Bring your favorite snack under your belt, maybe, and let's talk about food. Rob, Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Michael.
You guys are all amped up on Soylent. I can see we have bottles, and I like this sort of anonymous white bottle. It's very sleek and yet from the future.
Thanks. I hear the word ominous sometimes.
Ominous.
I like the minimalism that, and you can drink it, and it doesn't have to be this big advertisement. But I like the simplicity of the design.
It looks a little bit like the stormtrooper of food, I have to say. But,
thank you, I guess.
Well, it depends which side you're on, honestly.
Obviously, the dark side.
So when Chris was talking up Soylent, and when we started to see sort of the uptake in like the Reddit world, for example, I was hugely skeptical. I'm like, why do we want this? And it turns out more and more and more people want this, but let's start with where it began and then where the community has taken it.
It began because I really wanted it. I noticed that it's something that I had a very strong personal need for. I was very passionate about technology and development and, using science and tech to improve people's lives. But I figured I could start with my own. And what I was really struggling with was not, a lot of digital apps and sites and services, but I was eating very poorly. It just seemed very impractical for me to have to do this balance of cost and time and nutrition for every single meal. I was eating very poorly, and I was still spending.
What were you eating? Like the classic ramen diet.
A lot of ramen. I still like ramen, but frozen corn dogs and pasta and chicken. It was okay. I certainly wasn't starving, but I was I felt tired. I didn't, it was affecting my work, and it just seemed that I was repeating the same work every day over and over again. And it just seemed wasteful that I had to do this errand. I had to go all the way to the store, and I had to park, and then I had to pick everything from tens of thousands of different options and check out. And it just seemed weird. All these other things are getting so much more convenient. I buy everything else online. There's reviews. I can get quality products. I can get something that is, really fulfills my needs. Why am I basically a DIY food maker? Why is everyone expected to be a nutritionist and a cook and a logistics manager?
Okay, look, I like cooking, but a DIY food engineer, it's called cooking. You buy things and you cook it, and it's not that complicated. I mean, you make it sound like it's this 5,000 step process and that nobody's gone to a grocery store and nobody knows where everything is at Trader Joe's. Some of the criticism of what Soylent does is you take the joy out of food, but how do you respond to that?
I think it's hard to enjoy something if it's forced on you. And we do have to eat or else we're going to die. And cooking makes a lot of sense. It can be a lot of fun. I absolutely see the appeal as a form of art and expression and a hobby. I think that's the beauty of it. I think that's how cooking should be seen, as an important part of life and culture. But practically speaking, sometimes we romanticize it a little bit. And I think a lot of times it really is more manufacturing, that a lot of stuff that is coming out of our kitchens, especially for someone like me who's just moved to a new city, it's really not that great, and it's really not getting the job done. And I think it makes a lot of sense to use tools like manufacturing and industry to make products that fulfill our needs for different lifestyles. Lifestyles are changing. We don't live on farms anymore. We don't cook all of our meals from scratch anymore. I mean, the industrialization of the food system has been happening steadily for over a century.
That's true. I mean, the 50s promised us all sorts of magic food convenience, and the trend has been to go away from that, honestly.
But also to Rob's point, if you just look at the data, there's certainly people. There's some portion of meals are people going and buying food and cooking it, and some portion, especially in wealthier places like the coastal areas where we live, they're buying organic food and cooking it, and that's great, and no one's against that. But the reality is, a lot of meals are people are fast food, McDonald's, things like that. They are frozen dinners. They are people going to a convenience store. If you go to a typical convenience store, almost every single product in there is loaded with sugar and really bad for you. So, I think my view would be that compare, like, Soylent is not meant to replace the organic home cooked meal with friends. It's meant to replace the hamburger at McDonald's, which is just terrible for you. I mean, this is why we have an epidemic of diabetes and obesity. Is that people eat, they go and they have these terrible breakfast meals at McDonald's. They have, fast food. They have sugary stuff from a convenience store. We literally have an epidemic of this. I mean, sugar is the new smoking. It's going to, kill. It's going to be by far the biggest killer of this generation. And to Rob's point is, sort of to compare it to the organic home cooked meal is to romanticize it. Like, no one is saying we should. I don't think, Rob, you're saying we should get rid of those meals. I think what we're saying is take your worst meal, and instead of having something, typically the worst meal is driven by the fact that people are, cost and time constrained, right? So they go in and they get some fast food. Take your worst meal and replace it with something that's actually healthy.
Soylent, if you saw the movie Soylent Green, is not people, your Soylent, but what is Soylent? What's in the bottle or what's in the powder?
It's nutrition. It's everything the body needs that we know of. Protein, fat, carbohydrates, but you want the right forms of them. You need proteins with certain amino acid profile. You need certain types of fats that are healthier than others. You want carbohydrates that are low glycemic index. You'd like to avoid cholesterol. You need electrolytes, and you need vitamins and minerals, but you need ones that are going to be absorbed and bioavailable. And you need a good experience too. I mean, user experience in food is very complicated. It's, food is one of our only products that interacts with all 5 of our senses. So, texture is very complicated. Taste is very complicated. Flavor is extremely complicated. There's a lot of science and a lot of engineering that goes into food product design.
So how did you end up with this sort of formulation that from where you come from, and how is that verified that it meets nutritional requirements?
So we did that by basically working backwards from all that we know. We don't know everything about nutrition, certainly, but I think we do know plenty to make something that's far healthier than what most people are eating. So we go off of data that's been gathered by the Institute of Medicine, the World Health Organization. A lot of studies have been run. A lot of science has been done over the past century. And it looks like, the body is really made of parts. It's made of chemicals, and there's only so many things that we need, that we deplete, that need to be replenished. There's basically energy, that's stored in, atomic bonds from things like the lipids and the carbohydrates, and there's things that are more structured, like the amino acids that become proteins. Our body is continually undergoing a state of change, and we need to replenish its parts and its energy. And to a large extent, you are what you eat. Your body becomes, is built out of the food that you eat. So I think we need to be way more careful about what we're putting in our bodies.
All right, I have to ask this, Chris. You drink Soylent on a regular basis, and it, like you say, it's not a replacement.
Half my calories.
How much?
About half my calories, which is about the. I think it's about the average. Soylent.
I think that's the average. We have some hardcore users, but most people are
about half calories.
Most people around half the time.
For me, it's like my worst meal, so breakfast and maybe like afternoon snack or something.
Okay, and so we're looking at the ready-to-drink bottle, the Stormtrooper bottle. What does it taste like? Describe it for me.
Well, everyone's calling the ready-to-drink Cheerio milk, so it tastes very similar to when you eat Cheerios and then the milk left over, which is a kid or whatever, you'd always, at least I would always drink that and think it tasted really good, and it tastes like that. People, it's been because the caricatures of Soylent in the press. People have said it's, have caricatured it as not tasting good. People are universally shocked at how good it tastes.
I'll be honest. Again, I'm relatively skeptical about all this, and I tried it. Chris is a good salesman for Soylent, and it actually does taste pretty good.
I have a big fridge of it, and everyone loves it. Yeah,
it actually does taste pretty good. I have yet
to meet somebody who who does not like the ready to drink. I've given it to everyone who comes to my office, including
I describe it a little bit
entrepreneurs and reporters.
Pancake battery in a good way. Like, when you get to like wipe your finger
I think
around the bowl.
the
at
powder
the end.
tasted more pancake especially like 1.0.
Yeah, the powder, we had some issues with the texture. I mean, the way that the drink is processed, which is in a huge, very complex automated facility. It's very difficult to have something that is so nutritious to have it not spoil, to have it sit on the shelf, to have a shelf life of over a year, and not require refrigeration. It's a very complicated process. There's a lot of science and technology that goes into our food system that people, one, don't even know about, and I think don't appreciate as much as they should.
Well, but a big one thing I mentioned is a big goal of Soylent is not just to make something that's affordable and nutritious. It's also to have less environmental impact in the production of it. So the current system is just, it's just completely, I think, barbaric. We're slaughtering animals, treating them in an awful way. We were consuming, 80% of fresh water on Earth is used by agriculture. We have a drought in California. Like the amount of thousands of gallons of water end up going into the production of a few pounds of meat. It's an incredibly inefficient system. It's a wasteful system. It's destroying the Earth. It's
incredibly wasteful, and I don't think we really need to rely on it that much anymore. Because you don't need cow meat itself, although it has attractive properties like taste and texture, but those can be generated in different ways, and the proteins themselves can be generated in different ways, far more efficiently. So part of the goal here is to make the production of this product and more agricultural products far more efficient by just cutting out a lot of these intermediate steps that are really unnecessary. One example of this is the algae oil that is present in the product. So it's not grown like a traditional crop in a field. It's grown in a large tank in a bioreactor with single cells. And so since you're growing it out of these individual cells, you don't need the whole animal. You don't need all this energy going to keeping the organism itself alive, and you don't have plants soaking up metals from soil. You don't have to water things and the water leaves the water table. So
are you guys producing Soylent yourselves, or are you sourcing algae oil, for example? How is that working?
It's a physical product. We have a vast and complex supply chain. The goal is total vertical integration. Mm-hmm. I think in theory we could make everything, including the bottle, out of out of microorganisms that have been engineered to produce these components far, far more efficiently than traditional processes.
So when you step back, and there's a lot of discussion about food systems, and Chris, you bring up the drought and just the use of resources. How does Soylent and things like that, when you think of a food system of the future, what does that start to look like for you?
I think it's very it's something that would work just as well in space or on Mars as on Earth. The inputs are the same. You need CO2 and you need energy, which can come from light, and you need water, which you can recycle. I would like to be able to make food without burdening the Earth's resources whatsoever, and I think it's totally possible.
So what does that start to look like? Are we talking about like growing things in test tubes and vats and
I'm glad you asked. Yeah, bioreactors. These beautiful big photobioreactors. Spheres or
big
columns.
Blue glowing orbs.
Yes, exactly.
We're going to have a bunch of them in downtown LA, and you can go tour and see these beautiful blue.
Exactly. Yeah, going to the Soylent factory in LA in a few years people are going to come from all over the world to see these giant blue glowing orbs. So
and the orbs are growing or producing what?
Anything. So but mostly the components of the product.
Right.
Staples, macronutrients, proteins, fats, amino acids. So
but they don't look like, it's not like there's an ear of corn growing in a glowing blue, beaker or tub or tank.
No, it's going to look like exactly. You cut that out. It's going to look like just a cloudy drop of water, and you're going to see it needs CO2, it needs gas, and it needs nitrogen. So you'll see bubbles of gas going up through it, and you'll see a strong light source at the center, which provides the energy that the algae can feed on. And then they get harvested and processed, dried, or membrane extracted, the components that you need individually. So imagining a modular system where instead of one huge tank that could fail, you have many smaller ones. In fact, in the future, I think they may be efficient enough that anyone could have their own.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, we just had Back to the Future Day, and it sounds like you could just put this in your home, right?
Yeah, like the Mr. Fusion. I think we could have the Mr. Soylent sits on your counter, or you put it on your porch and it gets sunlight, or you have your solar panel which powers the LEDs, and the fundamentals, there's certainly no physical limit that would make this impossible. You
mentioned space. Have you been approached by, NASA, by the European Space Agency? Or, are people starting to think that, like, hey, we all just read The Martian or watched the movie. If we're going to go to Mars, we're going to
great product placement.
Yeah, what the hell are you doing? Yeah.
We actually have heard from people that places like SpaceX and Orbital Sciences, I think, stocks the food for the ISS.
One of the most popular use cases for Soylent is people hiking and doing other kinds of things like this, because it turns out the powder, carrying the powder in a backpack, it's the most efficient way to carry. It's the lightest weight per calorie, most nutritious way to carry.
Yeah, exactly.
Food. So no more freeze-dried chili, just bring Soylent powder. I see.
You could flavor your Soylent with chili.
Well, so I want to get to that community, because there's this big community. And Chris, I also want to let's back up. And how did you come across this?
I think, like a lot of people, I saw their crowdfunding campaign and was intrigued by it, and then was introduced to Rob, and and then we ended up investing. I think an interesting question to ask is why do we have the food system that we have, and why do we have these problems like obesity, and why are people continuing to buy food that's so bad for them? And I think, the answer is partly, for example, the distribution system is the fact that if you live, I grew up in Springfield, Ohio, which is a small town in Ohio, which I just went back to and visited my parents. And it's just basically, your choices are just everywhere you go, every street, every store is a fast food restaurant. That's what people do there. You go get fast food. And people, I think, in the West Coast, these are the organic movement. They sort of have this romanticized view that people are out there, I don't know, plucking corn and cooking it or something. It's just not how the non-coast parts of the United States work. They go and they get whatever, Arby's and McDonald's and this kind of stuff. And so the reason, a lot of it is just simply that this is what's there. This is what's convenient, right? And then you're bombarded with these very confusing messages about nutrition, right? Which is, 1 week it's fat is good for you, then it's bad for you. It turns out most of these things, we know most of, like if you're in the hospital, they'll give you, and you get in an accident, they'll give you a feeding tube with a bunch of nutrients that will keep you alive and keep you healthy. Like, science knows how to what is nutrition. It's not a mystery. And by the way, that feeding, the stuff they give you feeding tube, has a lot of the same stuff as Soylent has. We know the answers to these questions, right? The problem is there's these giant industries whose incentive it is to go and sort of obfuscate this and confuse people, and like things like the FDA food pyramid is a heavily politicized document. I come from this perspective of, like, how do you do something about that? And I think, unfortunately, the people that are trying to do something about the food problem have for the most part taken this organic approach, which I think is well intentioned, and I think is sort of directionally correct in that pesticides and other things are not good for you, and it's good to avoid them. And if you can afford it, you should go to the stuff you buy at Whole Foods is generally more expensive than the stuff you buy at a regular grocery store. But the problem is, in that movement, there's also a very anti-science trend, which is, for example, they're anti-GMOs. So GMO, it's just very confused. Because we've been doing genetic engineering, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and we just now have better ways to do it more precisely. And science will be the only way out of this mess, in my opinion, both for this and for climate change and for other kinds of big issues, is science. We need to embrace science. And so, part of what was intriguing me about Rob is that he and Soylent is that they are taking a pro-science approach to trying to do something, about our food issues, and provide an alternative for people that believe in science.
I think you're right, but I think, fortunately or unfortunately, there's this, it's two ends of the spectrum. So, the feeding tube in a hospital, we sort of equate with Soylent. So it's either that or it's I'm running through a organic cornfield picking my own corn. how can we meet in the middle? And Rob, how do you suggest that people meet in the middle in terms of food and food systems? Or is it like all Soylent or nothing?
Certainly not. It's certainly a spectrum, and I see Soylent as not oppositional to this, romantic viewpoint, because I think that there are some amazing aspects of food that we should enjoy more, and a lot of this organic movement is, has noble intentions about simpler living and respecting and understanding nature and understanding more about the food system. I think that's great, but a lot of times you just got to eat. You need your calories. You need to be full. You're trying to do something with your life. You're trying to do something with your time. Besides, you don't want to be a farmer. Most people in the United States are not farmers anymore.
Right.
So because they don't want to have to put in all that work. We can use automation. So that's why I see that it's very complementary. That if you have this default staple nutritious meal that makes a lot of sense, it just gets the job done. It's there when you need it. You don't have to worry about it. And then when you have the time and the desire, then you can really enjoy all of these wonderful cultural, traditional aspects of food.
Chris, you mentioned the Kickstarter campaign, and Rob, I want to ask you about this because typically, the Kickstarter campaigns are the really hardcore supporters, and they're really excited about it. How has the community of Soylent users, eaters, drinkers changed from that Kickstarter day to today? And how do you see it sort of spreading out in the community? And what are people doing with Soylent, in the community? Because I know there's an open source aspect to that, and so I want to talk about that as well.
Certainly. Well, I think the open source aspect is very important to me. I wanted to be as transparent as possible about this from the beginning, because that was one of my biggest issues with the food system, is that it is transparent, is that a lot of these vested interests seem to obfuscate the science and the messaging around trying to get people to behave a certain way, and that really bothered me. So I wanted to cut through that by being very, very transparent and open source about the formula, and encourage people, even in advance of when we were able to ship, to try out some sort of implementation of the idea. So in the early days, the community was largely DIYers, people trying to make some, Soylent-esque product on their own. But since we've been shipping, the community has exploded in number and diversity, and it's incredibly exciting and rewarding for me to go on places like the subreddit or the discourse or social media and see the way people talk about it and share it, and the way it's received, and how much people love using it, and all the different things people do with it.
Well, so describe some of those. Like, how is the Soylent, formula being tweaked by others out there, and to what end?
To this, today it's mostly in terms of cooking and flavoring, which I think is great. What I'm saying from the beginning is that this isn't, this is food itself. This is not the end of food. This is not anti-food. This is another option for food. And I think what, to Chris's point a little bit earlier, a lot of people just do not have that many good options for food. They just don't. I really felt that way, and I feel like this is an additional option that makes a lot of sense.
There's also this whole DIY Soylent community where people are taking the formulation which is open, and creating alternatives, right? So I don't know, maybe you can describe.
There's a degree of that. On the DIY, people are trying to make, use a different protein source, or use a different carbohydrate source, or
go low carb, or go high protein for bodybuilding.
Sure,
or low carb
different nutrition profiles. Recently, though, I think I've seen a lot more around just flavoring it, and
so I can
and cooking it. You can bake with it. People cook it into different forms, and I think that's very interesting. People make it into ice cream, yogurt, a lot of flavoring stuff too, and we're working on ways that we can actually encourage this sort of behavior, because it is this standard base, but a lot of people, it's rare that you'll eat just an egg or just flour. A lot of people, you'll mix it into a bunch of different foods, and I certainly see that that's probably always going to be a part of being human, is that people are going to crave a variety of different foodstuffs. So what we as a company, if we want to make people healthier and make food production more efficient, we need to fit into this behavior. And I think this is a great start. But in the future, that's we're going to take this same sort of mentality and make food very healthy, convenient, affordable, but encourage people to make it their own.
You keep saying affordable. How affordable is it? I mean, if I'm buying either the ready to drink or the powder, or making it, I guess at home, I could make it for as little as I possibly could. But on average, what are we talking about?
So with shipping, the powder is lower cost. The powder is less than $2 per meal. This is a full meal, 500 calories. The bottle is $2.50 for 400 calories.
So including shipping, you could live on $8 a day on the powder, and eventually that will go down.
Yes, it's $8 a day on the powder, and I'm trying to get that down to $5 a day.
Is there an opportunity? I mean, within, I don't know, it could be nonprofits, it could even be hospitals for that matter, it could be community organizations to kind of distribute this. And are you seeing people, we talked about space, but are other organizations reaching out to you?
Soylent is, could fulfill a very strong need in a lot of these areas. That's something that has been on my mind and been a focus from the beginning. And from the beginning, we have heard from a lot of these organizations, and it's just wonderful to talk to these people that are so passionate and see the potential of this product to help a lot of people. A lot of the issues there are just logistics. It's very difficult to move so much product to these remote areas, and the distribution is really the issue. So I think we can really attack that from a product side. One thing we are working on is what's called an RUTF, ready-to-use therapeutic food, which is it's kind of like a paste. So it's between the powder and the drink so that it is ready to consume, but it's cheaper to ship because it doesn't have as high moisture content. And the World Health Organization has a nutrition standard around this that we can just meet. And from there, we try to make it as low cost as possible. And for that, we're trying to get it down to $1 per day.
Right.
There's enough food on Earth to feed everyone, right? The problem is
certainly
distribution, which really means shipping costs.
Right.
That just basically the shipping costs are prohibitive for, unless the people who need the food cannot afford the shipping costs.
Right.
So
if there's drought,
you need to be made either more efficient or you need to subsidize it.
Or you can make the food more stable. There's plenty of food is produced to feed the world twice over. So why are so many people malnourished? Because it spoils, and it's expensive to ship because the moisture content is so high. And
we should mention one important feature of Soylent is that it lasts at least a year unrefrigerated.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be chilled. It says not part of the chill chain. So like a lot of food needs to be chilled all the way through, including in the trucks and things, which adds a lot to the expense and the energy consumption.
Yeah. In the United States, the amount of energy spent on refrigeration is just unconscionable. It's insane. So it was very important to me that we had a product that did not require refrigeration. That it's nice, it tastes nice chilled, but it's not required. And I personally don't own a refrigerator, and I think it tastes just fine.
How do you answer? Because you mentioned paste, and I want to get back to the notion of what food is. I can see chefs and the likes of Mark Bittman and Michael Pollan rolling their eyes, like, okay, now we're getting to paste. First it's in a bottle, and now it's paste. What are people most skeptical of, and what behaviors does Soylent need to sort of get past for it to get out there more widely?
I think routines can be very sticky, and if someone is in a certain food routine, which most people are for their staples, it can be a little hard to reevaluate it, even if it's not working very well for you, which clearly it's not, given the state of health in the United States and elsewhere. So I think we just need a little bit of perspective. We need a little bit to. It's really hard to pin down a certain definition. Obviously, food means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but genetically and physiologically, there's a lot of overlap between different people, and we just need these same parts. We need these same chemicals. Everything is made of chemicals. It's not something we need to be afraid of, including natural plants. So there's no fundamental disconnect, I think, between a engineered food and one that is naturally grown. In fact, it makes a lot of sense that to me to really understand the the scientific basis and of a natural food product and how it works, and then we think about how is it meeting our needs, and what can we do to what can we do to produce it so that it uses fewer of the Earth's resources or fulfills our needs better, and that's going to solve a lot of issues. Resource conflicts and hunger. These things have been declining pretty steadily. I think largely because of investment in industrialization and. If you look at the crops we have today, calling them natural is just a misunderstanding. Corn is not supposed to be yellow. Pumpkins are supposed to be this big. Watermelons aren't supposed to be this big. Soy has been changed.
But again, I'm just curious, and I know you've seen it multiple times, but getting past that, entrenched behavior where food is the way I imagine it in my head, it's this kind of Norman Rockwell Thanksgiving meal or something. How do you get people past that to even try Soylent? And then where do they typically go from there?
Well, I think that the value proposition is clearly very strong given the response of this.
So it's price is one of the things, right?
Price and function.
Right.
I think that's, a lot of people are already frustrated with their health. A lot of people are already frustrated with their routine. And so it's up to us to explain that this can, it gets the job done. It's very effective. It's very usable. It's very accessible, and just lower the barrier for people to try it.
And what would you say to the likes of, Michael Pollan and or, all these people in Brooklyn who are leaving Brooklyn and starting farms in upstate New York, like in the Hudson River Valley? How do you talk them down from their sort of bully pulpit?
Again, I think a lot of the intentions are noble and positive. I think there's a lot that I would agree with about understanding more about where our food comes from and how it's produced, and simpler living. And a lot of people are really stressed, and maybe they think that if we go back to being farmers, things are going to be easier. But our ancestors didn't have it very easy, and I think it's largely a romanticization of the past, and that we live in a very beautiful, more peaceful world than we had in the past, and I think a lot of it is because of technological development. A lot of things have gone wrong too. I think that is a very valid point, that there's a lot of anxiety that comes with modern behaviors, and a lot of it is caused by technology. But I think technology, if used correctly, is going to be a huge part of the solution as well, and that a lot of people's source of stress is their food and their health, and that's what we should be fixating on. And I don't think the solution is to just return to the way our ancestors had it.
Rob, I want to thank you. Chris, you as well. What's for lunch?
I don't know. Want to get some sushi?
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.